We'll have to talk about the elephant in the room, of course, Brexit, the biggest mistake this country could ever make. Well, the biggest mistake, in my view, is that we were given a referendum purely in or out and nothing else. How on earth anybody could have thought that was going to be a good idea and work out well, I have no idea. Let's talk to the former Deputy Prime Minister, Lord Michael Heseltine, who joins me now. Lord Heseltine, thank you for your time this afternoon. This is not a good time for politics and politicians in this country, is it?
I don't think they're coming over in a way that impresses anybody. It's been pretty sordid in some ways, but it's the indecision, I think, that is so depressing. It's just pushing the decision down the line closer and closer to the deadline. Avoiding the hard bits of politics, which is actually to stand up for what you believe in and take decisions.
I mean, this seems to have been it was started by David Cameron, who was worried that UKIP were going to get such a hold, if you like, on British politics. But it looks like nobody ever anticipated that people may decide that they don't like the way politicians were going. What do you think it was that actually caused those people in power at the time to take their eye off the ball?
I think the consequences of the 2008 crash, that across the Western world, that has led to a period, a decade of frozen living standards. And people can't accept that they played any part in that because they overspent, they overborrowed, the banks have spent too much, government spent too much, and the financial crisis developed at a frightening pace, and we're still paying the price for it. The tragedy is recently Britain had begun to come out of it with the fastest growing economy in Europe. That was towards the end of the Cameron and Osborne regime. That didn't survive very long, and people are fed up and frustrated, and they're looking for alibis. And the easy alibis are always the same. Somebody else, in this case Europe, and worst of all, the immigrants. There's patterns throughout history where this has happened with devastating consequences. And we're in it today.
What do you I mean, it's difficult to ask this question, but I'm going to anyway, because I thought that the way Margaret Thatcher dealt with the European Union was extremely good, and maybe we should have carried on being a little tougher with them. We didn't seem to be after John Major. What do you think she would have said if she was around now?
Well, you have to remember what Margaret Thatcher did. She did negotiate a deal which saved us some money, but much, much more profound was her decision to join Britain into the single European market, which was the biggest sharing of sovereignty in British history. And she was right to do it because she realized that if she didn't, the French and the Germans would fix the rules to suit them and not us. So she said, well, we better go and fix them to suit us, which she did. But of course then, and this is the really depressing thing, when the implementation of all those rules took place in the late 1980s, and when the economy wasn't doing well, Margaret played in my view, a much to be regretted role in saying, oh, it's the fault of the foreigners, it's all Brussels, it's all Europe, nothing to do with me. Of course, it was everything to do with her. But aided and abetted by her friends like Rupert Murdoch and Conrad Black, using their power over the British press, they poisoned Britain's attitudes to Europe. And that poison is still being disseminated day by day by some of our newspapers to Britain's enormous harm. And we are about to be confronted with a historic decision to opt out of one of the great powers of economic and political activity, our home market, Europe, 1,000 years of British history, Europe.
A lot of people, those people who, on the face of it, seem very intelligent, people who've been in politics most of their lives, say that this is going to be a very good thing for this country, that we will regain our sovereignty, we'll regain control of our borders, our money, our people. Why do you think they have got it so wrong in that case?
Well, the Brexiteers were given the principal political jobs, Foreign Secretary, the Brexit Department, the Trade Department, in order to prove these glib phrases and empty promises. And what did they do? After 18 months, we had nothing at all. So the Prime Minister intervened and did what Prime Ministers always do, put the civil servants in charge to try and make up for the deficiencies of incompetent ministers. And the clock is ticking. We still haven't got a deal. And even if we got the May deal, which looks unlikely, but even if we did, no one has the first idea what it means, because it's only after we have surrendered into the oblivion of Brexit that the hard negotiations get underway. And to me, it is the abdication of everything that every Conservative leader that I've worked for, from Winston Churchill onwards, worked for, argued for, implemented. We are throwing away our position at the top table of world politics.
How sad are you to see this country go this way after everything that you have done during your life, Lord Heseltine?
Well, it is a moment of unbelievable sadness. But the thing that saddens me above all else is that I know, virtually everybody knows, that there is not a majority for Brexit in the House of Commons. And what I find sad is the easiest word, is to see people who I know believe that Brexit is a disaster, finding reasons to avoid standing up and saying so. Now, there have been some conspicuous exceptions who've resigned. There's my old friend Ken Clarke, who has resolutely resisted this madness. But there are so many more who found ways to trim, to kick the can down the road, to avoid the decision. I just hope they'll refine their faith and their belief in Britain's essential self-interest, which is we have to be at the heart of the modern Europe, as Margaret Thatcher discovered and learnt and implemented with the Single European Act.
How do you see us getting out of this situation? Because a lot of people, Boris Johnson, I think, has said, and Jacob Rees-Mogg have said, and various other people, that if we just leave without a deal, it'll be fine. Europe will come crawling to us, and, of course, we'll be £39 billion better off.
Yes, well, already the rates of growth of our economy have eliminated the £39 billion. And, of course, they do say that. I hear them say it. But you then have to weigh those people against every British Prime Minister that I've worked for in the last 50, 60, 70 years. And, frankly, they don't rate. They don't begin to compare with the experience and the wisdom and the vision that said, basically, look, in a simple language, what did they say? They say, look, the Second World War impoverished us, and it brought to an end, effectively, the rule of empire. And Britain's got to find a new destiny. And the only real destiny available to us is actually to resolve the historic conflicts that have led to war after war in Europe and become part of the European movement, which is designed to stop this instinct to fight on the battlegrounds of Europe and find a way of working together so that we can compete with the giants that are emerging. America, self-evidently, China, India, and there'll be others. We are too small on our own to fund the level of industrial research and development and to exploit on our own the market opportunities.
Do you think the wrong kind of people are going into politics over the years, and I've been doing this for a lot longer than I care to mention, I've now met a breed of politicians who defer to their advisors and their press officers, and quite often their advisors and press officers are quite young and with very little experience, but the politicians defer to them to ask them what they should be doing, who they should be talking to, what they should be saying. And I think more so now than I can remember at any other time over the past 30 or 40 years.
I think there's too much of that. It's not it's not an essential feature of the system, but I think the politicization of the apparatchiks, the party politicians around the ministers, has not done anything to improve the status of politics. My own view is that ministers who know what they want were perfectly able to achieve it with the support of the civil service. Civil service, in the end, wants ministers to take decisions, and then they will follow. The last thing they want is people who don't know what they want. Now, let me say at once, the Brexiteers do know what they want, but they're, in my view, wrong. And I just shudder at the thought that they will get their way because too many people, the majority, in my view, in Parliament, are going to let them get away with it. I just hope that at the last moment they will find their inner strength to back their own deep personal convictions as to what is right for this country.
One of the things that I find a lot of people are frightened about, Lord Heseltine, at the moment is the amount of civil unrest that they think could occur if we don't go through with Brexit, that there are some
I've heard this argument, and it terrifies me. Do you know why it terrifies me? Because it's always the extremes who are prepared to take to the streets to bash anybody, and it all starts on a relatively small scale. You know, there's a crowd, and the rougher members of the crowd start muscling in. But I've lived through what happens when those muscling elements in the crowd from the extremes get powerful, and they have form in history. I don't want to exaggerate what is happening now, but I've seen it happen. I saw it happen with the nuclear protesters. I've seen it happen with the left wing of the Labour Party, but I've seen it with the right wing as well. And once you get to the point where you believe that the mob on the street has the rule, then you have abandoned parliamentary democracy at your peril.
If there was one word of encouragement to the people who are trying to sort this mess out at the moment, you could give them, what would it be?
Well, I can't think of it in one word, but in a sentence. Do what you believe to be right for Britain's self-interest.
Lord Heseltine, thank you very much indeed. Just before I go, I want to ask you if you have any thoughts on the fact that America and Russia are now beginning to come to some kind of impasse over their nuclear proliferation deals that they're now saying they're not going to continue in. Does it worry you at all?
Yes, it does worry me. And I'll tell you why it worries me, and it's sad for me to say it, but it has to be said. I just don't have respect for President Trump's method of government. He seems to believe that picking rows around the place and indulging in personal reactions through his tweeting process is a substitute for enlightened diplomacy and patient negotiation. His history as a president has been one long row after the other. And maybe you can do that in the big stakes of property development. Maybe you can. But you can't risk that once or twice you'll make a devastating mistake. And I'm appalled at the numbers of people that he's sacked, who's worked for him and left, and it unnerves me. I have the highest regard for Pax Americana, as I call it, the dominance of America over the last post-war period. But all American presidents that I've seen, and some through NATO worked for, have been measured and careful in their response. This guy seems to me a gambler, and the stakes have never been as high as they are today.
Are we back in the Cold War?
I don't think we are, no. But But I think that the risks that we could move into such dangerous territory have grown. It's important not to exaggerate the language, because I think there are many very sensible people in America who are as worried as I'm expressing. And there are constraints in the American Constitution which could well come into play. Indeed, they have come into play, of course, with the loss of control of the House of Representatives.
Lord Heseltine, an interesting time we live in, and one I hope that is not going to be as traumatic as I fear. Thank you very much indeed for your time.